Thank you guys for coming out to our panel. It is How to Teach a Board Game, which you probably have noticed from the big sign over here to my left. We're just going to introduce ourselves and explain why you should be listening to us at all. My name's Jess. I work at the Board & Brew, a board game cafe. I've worked there for like 5 years. Oh my God, 5 years. I'm sorry, my anniversary of working there was like 3 days ago. And I've done a bunch of different jobs. One of those was a game guru, so that basically means that they paid me to teach people games, which I feel like is a good reason as to why I would be good at knowing how to do this. I also was a nanny for a brief period of time, and a lot of the skills overlap.
I'm Arden. I used to work at the Board & Brew. I also used to be a game guru, so spent a lot of time teaching board games. And I currently, as one of my jobs, teach Excel classes, which is surprisingly similar both in audience and teaching style. So.
My name is David Montier. I also used to work at the Board & Brew. I never was a game guru, so I never had the pleasure of teaching people board games, but as a server and barista, I had to tell people what board games were more often than I thought I would have to. I am the student most of the time. These two and one who is not present today, unfortunately, are the ones usually teaching me board games. I also work in tech, which means that I have to do a lot of teaching technical concepts to non-technical audiences, which is a skill that overlaps way more than you would think.
Has this ever happened to you? Dun, 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 dun. Because it has happened to me, I'm sure. So our goal is to make sure that my past, this is not your future. I won't let this happen to you guys, I promise. Follow our steps and you will be able to survive.
So basically you're explaining this is going to be fun right now.
Well, maybe. Well, you'll decide later, but hopefully.
We have comment cards in the back. Not accepting constructive criticism at this time.
Explanation of board game panel peppered with reassurances that it will be fun.
It will be meta fun at the very least.
Okay, so to get us started, David, take it away.
Yeah, so big thing first off, I mentioned earlier that half of my job is explaining technical concepts to non-technical people, so a big thing is to know your audience. If you're talking to people who play a lot of board games, it's okay to use big technical terms like, oh, this is a drafting game, this is a worker placement game, or a hand management game. Those terms mean something to them. If you're trying to teach, like, your grandmother, don't use that. Say, let's take, like, the theme of a game, for example, right? So we're going to talk about Wingspan in a little bit. Arden, what's the 5 minute on Wingspan?
So Wingspan is a game where you are bird watchers. You're trying to find as many birds as possible in different areas. You are trying to feed them tasty snacks, make them lay eggs, and have friends.
Seems fun, right? We've tricked you.
You can get people to buy into a game with, that kind of explanation.
Or eggs.
Or eggs.
You can give them, like, the overall theme, and that's an interesting thing that will get people invested in your game. But if you just tell your grandmother, oh, this is a drafting game that has elements of worker placement in it, you will lose them immediately.
Unless you have a really cool grandma.
Yeah. And one thing that's important on this front, too, is that as people who I imagine play a lot of board games, it's really easy to go to explain a game by comparing it to another game that you think lots of people have played. So if I'm trying to teach Sushi Go to an audience of casual gamers, I would say this is like Seven Wonders, but there's no fighting and there's no science and it's all sushi. And that's helpful for people who have played Seven Wonders a couple of times, but for people who haven't, they feel like they've missed something and it immediately distances them from the experience of learning the game because now they think, oh, I haven't played that other game, so I'm not going to get this one. So if you instead just ignore talking about Seven Wonders and talking about drafting, and then you instead just say, I'm going to take a card out of this pack and pass it to somebody, then you're, one, teaching them indirectly what drafting is, which will be helpful in their future if they want to learn more games, and two, meeting them with their knowledge base and not yours.
Or you can give it connected to another different game, so you could be like, we're playing Go Fish, but with raw fish. To bring people in, sorry, yes.
It also helps to kind of anticipate what kind of games your group is going to enjoy. There's competitive versus co-op games, there's competitive and co-op games, there's long and short fort games, you can pick like a tiny box, easy to learn, easy to master kind of game, or you can pick up something like Twilight Imperium if you know that you're teaching board game people. Don't pick up Twilight Imperium. So it's about catering the game that you're going to play to your audience. If we're here and you want a fun game to play with your friends, maybe something that takes like an hour or two, or if you want to, play a very long game, just know who you're going into it with.
Okay, so before you even invite people over to your house, my recommendation is to be prepared. And that starts by learning the game. You don't necessarily have to learn it directly from the rule book. You can learn it, I mean, nowadays some games are coming out with scannable QR codes where you can find a how-to video on YouTube of how to play the game. But you need to know the game beforehand. And then also, I think you need to read the rule book on top of that. Not just to learn the rules again, but also to get comfortable with the rule book. Because your job, while the game is going on, is also to be answering whatever questions people have. And so once you know kind of where the information is in the rule book, it's a hell of a lot easier to skip back through and be like, okay, this is the clarification I need. If the first time you have your hands on the rule book is when people are over at your house, we'll just go whoop right back to that Onion article earlier, I promise.
Yeah, if we had not prepared to give you this panel when we're trying to teach you something, it'd be really awkward because we'd be spending a lot of time shuffling through note cards or flipping back and forth between slides. Instead, we made sure that we knew all the information that we wanted to communicate to you and the correct order in which to do that, so that you don't have to sit here and watch us go, wait a second, hold on. Actually, it's not particularly enjoyable or engaging.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the ways that we like to think about giving the information when you're teaching a board game, if any of you have any sort of journalism or writing background, is the inverted pyramid or the inverted triangle. So like we were talking about that fun elevator pitch of the game, it's super broad, it doesn't explain how you play at all, it gives just the information that you think is going to entice your players to play. Then you're going to go down a little bit and say, some slightly more specific information. This game, everybody's taking their turns at the same time, or everyone's going in a row. This game scores at the end versus it scores in the middle. And then just trickling that information out exactly when you need to for players to understand things. If you sat down with a game where you've read the rulebook 5 times and you explained it by reading the rulebook to people in that order, that's not the most sensible order to give that information, even if you need to cover every point. So instead, if I say, here's what the board looks like, here's what the pieces are, here's how you take your turn, here's how you score, that's not usually the order the book is in, but that's the order that you, as my play table group, are going to understand.
And would be interested and able to focus on.
Yep.
Have any of you ever tried to teach another person Magic the Gathering? Have any of you ever tried to teach another person Magic the Gathering while sitting next to somebody who also plays Magic the Gathering? Have any of you run into that scenario where the other person who also plays Magic the Gathering will chime in with X, Y, and Z corner case to whatever rule you're trying to explain?
Actually, if you have Kiki Jiki Mirror Breaker on the field,
that happens a lot. So it's good to start with only the broadest information, and when those corner cases come up, that is a perfect time to explain them, but not necessarily while you're trying to explain to somebody what mana is.
A lot of times the way that I will handle this is by explicitly saying the word asterisk when I get to a point that there's going to be a corner case later. So I'll say, generally the places that you gain score are on your birds, your eggs, and your goal cards, asterisk. I will explain another scoring element to you later. I'm going to make it clear that there's going to be a little bit more information on this front, but because you don't need to know it right now we all understand that we're just going to move on. And this is also helpful when you have people at the table who do know what the corner cases are, because you've now communicated to them, hey, I understand that there's something else that I'm skipping here. I'm skipping it on purpose. So now we all understand why I'm skipping it. Mm-hmm. And that can be really helpful.
So a good tactic to actually keep your players involved... Microphone, sorry. A good tactic to actually keep your players involved is to give them something to do. The biggest enemy of getting people to learn whatever you're trying to teach them is this little content rectangle that I am also staring at right now.
I didn't even bring mine, I knew it wasn't safe.
So basically, if you keep people involved, if you say, hey, can you shuffle this deck of cards for me, or can you open up this little package of dice and start sorting these out by type, it'll go a surprisingly long way in keeping people just engaged in what you're telling them.
Because they feel like they're participating in the explanation. They don't feel like they're at school. They now feel like you're working on a project together. You can even give them a totally irrelevant task. In this picture, Kenny is sorting out the food tokens in Wingspan. You don't need to sort them because they're color-coded, but this gives Kenny something to do for 10 minutes. And I can be explaining things to Kenny, and as it turns out, you can't do this and look at the content rectangle at the same time, because you only have 2 hands generally. So if you occupy both of them...
Asterisk.
Asterisk. If you occupy all of the hand options that a person may have, then they can't look at their phone or doodle or get distracted.
This is also, I know you won't have to because you read the rule book 5 times like I recommended earlier, but if there is a rule that you are like not 100% sure on or something you want to verify, when people are distracted is a good time to take a minute or two, flip through, figure out all those things you had questions about, and then put it down because you don't want to be open and looking at it when you're explaining the rules.
You have practiced the magician's art of misdirection, so that people don't look at you not knowing what you're talking about.
Exactly.
Very important.
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing that's really helpful with teaching board games is to display an air of authority because you need to seem like you need to know the game, but you also need to seem like you know the game to get people to want to listen to you, to watch you, to pay attention, and to take what you're saying to heart.
And to trust you when you say, this is how it works. Even if you're not 100% sure, if you say, this is how it works, and maybe I'll find out after the game that that's actually a house rule that I made up in the moment because I didn't remember the rules. It doesn't matter. We played the whole game operating under the false assumption that those were the correct rules. And that works out pretty well as long as you don't have that one person who knows the rules. If you do, you have to slay them. I'm sorry. There are no other options. They are not allowed to leave the room.
But it's also perfectly reasonable to be like, look, I am the one explaining the rules.
Thank you.
I am the one explaining the rules. Please let me get through the rules. If you have corner cases or like things that I am absolutely saying wrong, don't let me necessarily like skimp on them, but please hold them for the end and don't just interrupt the complete flow of me explaining the rules just to get that corner case in.
A lot of times if I know a game and someone else is teaching it, I will leave the room and come back when they're done so that the person who's teaching can explain exactly how they want to. I don't have to sit on my hands and go, but what about the points? And try not to explain that. And then I can come back at the end and say, hey, I know Kenny explained all the rules of this game, but here's one strategic note that you should keep in mind. Hey, you're going to need some of these cards, so you should keep them, or you need this resource, it's valuable later, things that are not in the rules but will be helpful to a new player. But I didn't take away from Kenny's teaching experience, and the people that I'm playing with got to see Kenny as the expert.
All right, so now we're going to talk about the steps that we use when we actually are in front of our play group. So we've already distracted them. They're shuffling things, they're picking up pieces. So now is a good time to set up the board. So when you're setting up the board, you can point out different zones and like what they do, what is your zone, what you have control over, that kind of thing. So how would you do this for Wingspan?
So in Wingspan, you have a tableau in front of you that's kind of like your bird watching journal. You're going to see birds that are from 3 different areas. You're going to see forest birds, meadow birds, and marsh birds. There's different locations that you can play them, and there's different action zones where you can indicate what you're doing on a turn. And then you're going to see there's some resources in the middle. There's cards with pictures of birds on them. There's cards with pictures of food on them. There's a little birdhouse that's got some dice in it. There's a container full of eggs, and then there's this little scoring zone that's going to give you some information about each individual round, and we'll explain what all the pictures on this board and these cards mean as we go.
All right, so then the next thing that I would explain would be what the components are. So like what components you're going to be using in the game and which ones you have control over.
So I would say you're going to have your bird cards that once you play them in your tableau are your birds. They all have powers on them. You're going to have food that you're going to acquire using a certain action and then spend to get more birds. You're going to have eggs that you're also going to acquire using an action and spend to get more birds. Eggs are also worth points. There's going to be a card that has a special end of game scoring thing on it for you. And this is how you understand what the words on that mean. And then I would probably show this little set of scoring tokens that indicate each round's goal, and I wouldn't explain what it meant yet, but I'd say these 4 things are going to show us in each of the 4 rounds of this game exactly what we have to do to get points during that round.
Okay, the next thing I would explain would be how to win, but that's very specific on the each game. So for this one, would you explain how to win now, or would you save it for later?
So I would explain in this game how to win now, because actions that you do during your turn are going to earn you points eventually, even though we won't count the score until the end. This is a Euro-ish game, if you know that term. But so I would say all of your birds have points on them. All of your eggs are worth points. There's different ways that you can stash extra points on or under your birds. I would explain at this point vaguely what our specific round scoring means, to say, oh, in the first round you need the most eggs in the meadow. And that's what that kind of means. And then I would explain what the scoring on each card means.
Then I would explain what the iconography is, and that would be a good time to kind of review most of what you've already spoken about.
Yes, so in this instance, I go through the Wingspan board, which has pictures of basically all of the icons on it already. So I would say if you see this icon that looks like a die, it means you pick up one of these die and get the thing that's on the face. If you see eggs, you get or spend eggs, depending on where it is. And then I would use some of those point goal cards to explain what some of those symbols mean. And then at this point, I would finally explain what each round means specifically, because now you understand what the pictures mean, and each of the scoring rounds in Wingspan does not have words on it. It has an egg symbol in a certain type of nest, or it has a bird symbol in a certain type of zone.
Mm-hmm. And then the last step, and this is very dependent on what game you're playing, is going through a demo turn.
So in Wingspan, I would say you have 4 different actions you can take. You signify what action you're taking by putting one of your little cubes on that action. And I would actually demonstrate how to do each of those actions with what's on the board at that point. Sometimes I'll deal out a sample hand to people so that we can all look at it together and then we can shuffle it up and redeal. But I would say, if you want to play a bird, here's what you have to do and here's what you have to have. If you want to get food, here's exactly how that works. I would also explain how the powers on each bird can work, because the powers that you get to use are based on the action that you take, and how you read the symbols on the board in terms of how it influences your actions. So based on where you're placing a bird on the board, it has a different cost than it would normally. So I would explain that at this time as I'm showing the specifics of the play bird action. I've said the word bird so many times.
You said bird a lot, and egg.
Egg.
So those are the steps that we take when we are teaching board games for fun and for work. And honestly, when I'm teaching a board game, I sometimes will take that demo turn even farther, do a few demo turns, and then completely reset the game and start over from the beginning. You made a very good point about this earlier.
Yeah, so a lot of people, especially if you want to play a game more than once, say something that's relatively expensive like Wingspan, you want to introduce it to your play group and make sure that they have a good time. Nothing makes people have a bad time like losing ferociously at a new game, especially when you've played it a bunch of times. So if I scored 110 points and somebody scored 30 points, they're going to say, this game sucks. I don't want to play it anymore. And a lot of games like Wingspan, like Scythe,
yeah.
Longer games, the things you do in the first couple of turns matter a lot throughout the rest of the game. And if you don't know what you're doing, you'll set yourself up to fail. So if I tell people, hey, we're going to do a couple of turns. If you want to keep going, if you feel confident, we can do that. But I'm going to give you the opportunity at the end of turn 3 to start over, and I'll tell you what you maybe could have done differently, or I don't have to if you don't want me to. That can really help people feel like they have a low-impact way to learn how to actually do the game mechanics.
To try some things out, but not be like super stuck.
Yeah. Because there is nothing worse than getting 10 turns into a 50-turn game and realize that by turn 5 you had already lost. Mm-hmm. And then you have 45 more turns. That's a lot of time to spend losing at a game.
Right. Or even if you haven't lost, you've like cemented yourself in a play style you don't enjoy, you know?
Yeah. There are some games, I don't know if any of you have ever played Galaxy Trucker, but this is a game where you're building a spaceship and then going through space. But the building a spaceship part happens very quickly. It's like a dexterity time-based game where you're flipping tiles and trying to put them in the right place. And you can build a ship that is legal by the rules and you will lose with it. And so a lot of times what I do when I'm teaching people how to play that game is I'll tell them from the beginning, we're going to build ships like normal. There's going to be no handicap, but I'm going to fly your ship and you're going to fly mine. So I get to have the fun experience of my ship falling apart because it's a lot goofier that way, and I don't care if I win because I've played the game a lot. And then another person who doesn't know what they're doing gets to play as if they knew what they're doing and then make the actual decisions that the game requires you to make and actually understand how it's supposed to work, instead of me being in my perfect, polished, no open connections, all my crew members won't get sick spaceship, watching their ship falling apart and going, It's a lot more friendly for everybody involved.
All right, awesome. So we've successfully taught you Wingspan. We didn't, but we showed you how we would have successfully taught you Wingspan.
And if anybody does need anyone to teach them how to play Wingspan, I will teach you how to play actual Wingspan if there's a demo copy in the library.
All right, I'm leaving.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay. You don't know how to play either.
Yeah,
I can teach you how to play too.
All right, awesome. So that's all we have for you guys. Does anybody have any questions?
How do you break up like clarifying questions while you're explaining something? So now you said to like save stuff for the end, but like people aren't understanding the concept. Like, repeat the question.
The question was, how do you handle if somebody has a clarifying question as you're going? Generally, we encourage you to have people save questions until the end, because a lot of times you will get to the question organically through your explanation. But a lot of times if you're explaining a game that has different phases, like, hey, I'll show you the board, then I'll show you the cards, then I'll show you how the scoring works, I generally like to check in at the end of every section, like bookmark it to say, okay, does anyone have any more questions about the iconography? Are there any symbols on the cards that you don't understand? And then just make sure that everyone is at the point that I'm at in the explanation, and then we all move on. And if people have further questions, then we can save those until the end.
But like, you choose when to accept the questions.
Yes.
Don't make people feel comfortable to bombard you with questions, because that's how like teaching a game goes from 10 to 15 minutes to an hour and 15 minutes.
Especially if you are imbibing while you do this. It is very important to start at the beginning and say, hey, I expect you all to shut up while I do this. And if you don't, I'm going to yell. That honestly is pretty effective, to say, hey, as soon as we're done explaining, you can go back to having a fun party time. But until then,
focus.
yeah.
Have you guys ever just taken a YouTube video of how to play a Zool and just slapped it on the table and said, watch this?
So I have not done that of a game of that size.
The question was, have you ever just used the YouTube video tutorial to teach people how to play a game instead of teaching it yourself?
So I've never done that of that size, and I think if I were to do that, I would still re-illustrate it after. But I have had like large, like 2 rooms and a boom parties. I don't know if you guys know that. It's like a large format party game. It plays like 20 people, 20 to 30 people. And when I do that, I'll send out like a big Facebook group invite and attach in the Facebook group a video of how to play and just ask people to watch it. And then I re-explain the rules again. I mean, I'm obsessive like that, but the last thing you want is for someone not to fully understand it and then have a bad time.
And with things like YouTube tutorials, unless you are like the one who made the decision to watch it, you do lose some of that element of player engagement. If you were to say, take the game out and have people start opening stuff up and helping you set up the game, you lose that just like weird tactile engagement that you get from people.
Also, then somebody is looking at a laptop, and then there's that urge to be like, can I play another YouTube video? Because I have this really funny Brian David Gilbert video I would love to show you right now. Can we just like take 5 minutes? And then it's gone, and then you're not playing a board game anymore.
Can you tell us a story about a particularly difficult to teach student, and then how you handle the different
Okay.
The question was if you've ever had a particularly difficult student to teach board games, and how did you handle that?
I've had many. I will choose. I will choose a few. So, as a game guru, one of the most difficult things is not even just teaching the game, but choosing a game for a customer, because that was part of my responsibilities as well. And when you have someone who's not super well versed in board games, and you ask them what they would like to play, sometimes you'll get something along the lines of, I want to play a big game that's not like hard, but is challenging and fun. And, it's just like,
and cards are in it also.
And cards, definitely with cards. And that's not very helpful. For like actually teaching a game, the biggest issues that I've had with people is when people aren't focusing. And I am generally a nice person and not super aggressive, but if I'm teaching a game and you're not focusing, like, I've had very good luck with just screaming at someone. Like, kindly, gently screaming at someone, being like, shut up, focus. You can go outside, and I can teach it to you later, or you can focus. Sorry, Lauren. I needed to yell at someone.
Specifically.
Make an example of them.
Honestly.
Head on a pike.
Make an example of someone.
No pike. No pike. Real back.
So Jess was talking about 2 Rooms and a Boom a little bit ago. This is a really fun party game when you have a lot of people over for a birthday party or for New Year's or some event where people are hanging out. Specifically, you need 2 separate rooms, as the title implies, and booms. So you need to be playing like at a house party. And so I have been to parties where people wanted to play that game, and then I have wound up being the de facto person to explain it, because I am the person who will make sure that everybody who's playing is standing in the room. Everybody who's playing has a card. because there will be lots of people who are like, I want to play that game, and then they'll amble away. So having to corral people and make sure that if they want to play, they're invested from start to finish can be pretty hard. It can be really helpful in that instance to have like audience plants, which sounds strange, but if you have 1 or 2 people who have played the game before, who know how the explanation of the rules work, and who understand that you have to explain all of the rules in order for it to work, especially in hidden identity games, like everyone has to know exactly when and how you are allowed to show the picture on your card. If you don't do it right, it ruins the game for you and everyone else. So then you have to stop and start over, or just accept that you are not playing the game anymore. So if you have those people, generally, especially because I also am not a super yelly confrontational person, I lean on those people and they will say, hey, she's talking, you need to stop. Or hey, they're talking, can you chill a second, put your phone down and play or watch. So having those people who are on your side in corralling the group can be really helpful, even if it can make it sometimes challenging if that person knows the game. But
You there in the back had one, and then you.
Can we grab these slides from anywhere?
Can we grab these slides from anywhere?
Oh.
Yes. If you give me your email, we have some note cards. If you write down your email, I can send it out to everybody probably next week.
This panel is also being videoed by MAGFest. Hi, camera. Hi, camera person. So
It
you
should
can
be
see
posted
the
on
panel
YouTube.
there on YouTube at some point in time.
How do you deal with players who forget the rules halfway through?
So generally,
How do you deal with players who forget the rules halfway through? This time I remembered.
Thank you. So generally, it's good to check in as you go to make sure that people are kind of tracking. But when it seems like somebody is taking an action where it's clear they don't understand the consequences of their action, it can be good to tactfully say, hey, don't forget that you need to do this other thing later, or hey, you actually can't do that because you don't have the resources for that, so why don't you instead take this other action that gets you resources? It's helpful to gently correct people in that way when people seem like they're kind of floundering or struggling, rather than just treating them as if they are stupid for not understanding.
Your players are your sheep, and it is your job to shepherd them into the pen of knowing how to play a board game. Just notwithstanding.
Yes.
Do you have any specific advice for games that have very asymmetric rules? Cough, root, cough.
So specific advice for games with asymmetric rules like Root, where everyone is doing their own thing.
Pray to your God.
But yep. So that is a game when honestly I would make sure that the people that I would either be really set for teaching 4 different board games, or send the rules out and make sure I'm playing with people that I feel confident would be able to teach themselves that game. So for instance, with Root, or like invite a single person to play Root with you, like slowly add new people in. So for instance, I've played Root with Kenny, talking a lot about Kenny, and a few other of our friends, and so we already knew how to play the game. We chose some of the harder to explain characters, and then Kenny taught the one additional person that we added to our group how to play their character, and that was fine.
Games like Root also often include very specific demo turns. So the rules will tell you, follow these exact steps, do these exact things, draw these exact cards. And so using those can be pretty helpful, because then you are supposed to scrap it at the end and say, now we've done the demo. But the rules itself understand that it's really hard to teach those kind of games. I've also had this experience with, if you've ever heard of Space Cadet, where everyone is playing a different mechanic because you're flying a spaceship. So there's like a shuffleboard element, there's a Yahtzee element, there's a like memory game element. And I find with games like that, where it's cooperative, it's really important, as much as it stinks, to sit down with everybody and teach everybody every station, because you don't know it at the beginning, but you will switch powers. You are going to switch stations several times, so you need to know how to play all of them. And it also makes it easier when it's not just, I'm just sitting and watching Jess do something for 10 minutes that I don't understand at all. That can feel really isolating. Just like taking long combat turns in D&D, it really takes people out of the moment when they don't know what's happening all over the place on the board.
How would you alter this process for kids?
How would I alter this process for kids? Well, distract and involve a lot. I would focus on that. I would make sure that it is a game, first of all, that kids will be able to play and enjoy, of course. And then I would personally lean heavy into flavor, because that tends to get kids and myself really into board games. So like our elevator pitch for Wingspan earlier, which was just, you get birds and you get to see all these cool birds, and there's eggs and they have babies and you get to feed them. Once you talk about it and you can come in through a thematic way, it kind of, it just makes a lot more sense, and I feel like it works generally better with kids.
I also sometimes will set up like a secret shadow curriculum if I'm teaching board games to the same group of kids or people who aren't into games over the course of a few weeks, to have kind of a stepwise difficulty curve of, I'm going to teach a really simple game like Set. It's just like looking at pictures and patterns, and then maybe we'll do Sushi Go Party. That's a really fun game with cute drawings on it, but there's a little more strategy. And then gradually get them to a game like Wingspan, because obviously there will be kids of a certain age who just can't understand this kind of game, but it's not all kids at the exact same age are going to struggle or not struggle with this type of game. So being able to kind of test the waters and see what they're interested in and what they're able to keep up with and what the specific child's attention span is can be really helpful.
Yeah, also, like you mentioned Sushi Go earlier, you can start with an more straightforward game using a similar mechanic, and then kind of just like, whoop,
like
hop into a
Carcassonne
harder
for
one.
kids, and then Carcassonne for
adults.
because it has a kids version already.
And then Carcassonne for Eldritch Beings. You there in the front.
How do you best arbitrate, I guess, lack of better term, interpretation of the rules? People who read it one way but activate it another way.
So the question is, how do you arbitrate rules interpretation? Obviously, this is a little more relevant in more complicated games, but
person who teaches game is king.
yeah, so it's really important to just emphasize, especially if you're in that mixed bag group where some people know games and some people don't, to say, hey, I appreciate that you know how to play games, but this is going to work a lot better if you just let one person communicate and let one person make the decisions. Maybe next time we play, we can talk about the house rules or different interpretations that you had, and we can test it out. But having just one person who is the arbiter is really helpful. It's the same way in D&D, your DM is always the person who says this does or does not happen, even if they're wrong. In that moment, they are correct because they're the one who's running the game. That kind of mindset helps in that instance.
But the person who's teaching the game has read the rule book 5 times already, so they're never going to be wrong.
There are also places where you can look up some rules discrepancies, things like that. Like the Board Game Geek forums are really helpful for that. So if there's a section of a game that I'm learning on my own and I'm not sure how to interpret a particular corner case that isn't addressed in the rules, or I didn't read it correctly when I first read it, sometimes I'll go online and see that audience opinion of other people who have played the game as much as I have. But I do all that beforehand, ideally. So I say, all right, this is an area of ambiguity and I've picked my solution. And all other solutions are temporarily wrong.
So I think I heard you say something about like house rules. Like if you come up with that like through teaching the game, where does that come into play when you're teaching someone for the first time? Do you let someone know during the initial explanation or later?
So the question is, if you know you're playing with house rules from the start, do you tell people or when you're explaining it, or do you just kind of explain it as if it's the case and then maybe address it later? I generally like to address it as I go. So if you've played Mysterium, Mysterium is this really cool asymmetric co-op game where one person is a ghost and they're trying to, via clue-style person, place, thing, information, communicate how they died. And Mysterium came out in 2 versions, one in Europe and one in the US. The rules in the US are very different and I think objectively worse. So now when I teach the rules, I say, hey, please don't look at the rule book. I'm gonna teach you the Czech version. I don't speak Czech, so I can't give you the rule book, nor does anyone here speak it. So I will say, there's gonna be these tokens, I'm gonna put them back in the box because we're not gonna use them. There's gonna be this whole mechanic that we are ignoring, or there's this potential option that we're not playing with, and then I'll just kind of move on from there and not let anybody who, like me, when I was first taught how to play Mysterium that way, say, but what about the betting? But what about the bidding? But what about the yes-no tokens? We scrap all of that, ignore all of those questions as politely as possible, and just make it clear that for this moment, in this little bubble of serenity, this is how this game functions.
So you over there, and then we'll get you in the back.
Do you have advice on dealing with analysis paralysis where it interrupts other people's
Do you have advice on analysis paralysis when you're seeing someone else at the table experience that where they're paralyzed and not making a decision?
I would say, I think a good thing to do would just be to remind people of the possible options, and maybe if you see a line in their strategy that might be decent, if the goal is just to create a smooth experience and make sure that everybody is having fun, I don't think it's out of the question to be like, you could do this or this, and just try to narrow down their options a little bit and present them a couple that might be relatively decent. Other people at the table who actually teach board games more often. Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah,
I think it's dangerous waters to tread, but I don't necessarily think that there's a better answer that I'm coming up with. The only thing that I would say would be when you're teaching the game and you're going through that demo turn, just really nail it down what the options are to try and help people understand and to get people thinking about what they can do on their turn before their turn. And then also, if you see someone playing on their phone or getting up from the table when it's other people's turns, it's a fine time to be like, hey, you could be thinking about what you're going to do next turn, or do you not understand something? Can I help you with anything?
One thing that is a really important thing to avoid, I've found, is David's point about telling what all of the possible options are is great. I think it's important to say, with the resources you have on your board, these are the 3 things you could do. Pick one, whatever you want to do. What really takes people out of a game is you acting for them or telling them just to do this thing, this is the best thing to do. Because then not only are they not learning the strategy because you're just playing for them, they're no longer playing the game in the same way that you are. They're functionally being puppeteered by you. People talk about this as quarterbacking when you're playing a co-op game, and it can really make people feel stupid and not involved if you say, hey, you are not knowledgeable enough to make the decision right now, so I am just going to take that power out of your hands. It's really important to make your players feel as empowered as possible, even if they don't really understand what's going on.
You there in the back.
When you don't have time for an extensive demo turn, to research in games where the first few turns are important, what do you do?
So the question was, what do you do if you're in a game where the first few turns are really important and you don't have time to do demo turns and then revert and try again?
This very much depends on the game, but some games that are like that will actually have pre-made first turns for you. So Wingspan is one of these.
Yeah, but then you can continue after.
You continue after that, yeah. It tells you what to do for the first bit, and then you kind of go into it.
Another thing that can be really helpful is, and especially for games like Wingspan and other Euro games that have a dedicated scoring pad, this is going to sound weird, but I promise this has worked for me in the past. If there's a dedicated scoring pad, especially where you're going to write down points at the end, it feels very final, your score in the game. So you know that there's going to be a point where, recorded for all of human history, it's going to show that you did a bad, stupid job. So if you tell people, hey, we're just going to play this game for the first time, we're going to go all the way through it, but we're either not going to count the points at all, or we'll count the points but maybe not count my points because I'm the person who's played before and you don't need to know how many points I got, because everybody kind of understands that generally the person who's teaching the game and has played it before is probably going to win.
But you know. You get to know.
You get to know, which is fine. But then it's like everyone else is playing a game with people of equal skill level. So it's the 3 people who I'm teaching the game playing against each other, and if they all only got 40 to 50 points, that feels like a nice tight competition, and then it doesn't matter that they all did equally bad in the beginning. So then you kind of just let people be freed of the responsibility of feeling dumb.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
How emotionally exhausting is it to teach a board game?
How emotionally exhausting is it to teach a board game? Sorry, was that the whole question? I totally cut you off there.
I can teach a board game once and be fine. If I have to teach a board game twice in a night, I'm just like, I don't even want to play the second. Is that something you experience, or is that a personal problem?
No, it can be.
Yes.
It can be very. You are essentially. You're teaching somebody something. You are managing a lot of different steps. I think it's kind of an experience thing. I think as you get more well-versed in it, it becomes a little easier over time. It also depends on the group you're playing with and how engaged your players are, and how engaged you as the teacher can keep them. It's not easy.
Yeah, it can sometimes be really exhausting. I think setting expectations with your players before you start can be really helpful, because the times that it for me is the most exhausting is when people don't understand that I need them to listen the entire time, and I'm constantly having to corral people, because then it feels like I am dragging people kicking and screaming into the fun zone. That's like not very fun for me. Even if they wind up having a good time, it feels like I had to break my back to get these people to have fun. So if I set up to say, hey, I'm going to teach you how to play this game, it's going to be really fun, I'm going to make the explaining of it fun, but I do need you to pay attention and hang out with me during this experience that we're having where I'm teaching you this thing. And if people are willing to work with you in that sense, it is a lot less strenuous to teach. I also personally really enjoy teaching. I think all of us enjoy teaching, which is why we're here teaching you about teaching stuff. No. So if you're the kind of person who enjoys teaching people about things, teaching board games is a really refined version of that, because you're doing a whole curriculum in just one sitting.
Okay, so from a different perspective, and this may seem surprising, I hate teaching people stuff. I don't like being the center of attention. I hate that I'm sitting up here right now. I'm joking. I'm having a great time. But I would like practice makes perfect, honestly. Like, I didn't feel comfortable going up to random strangers and teaching them board games when I first, oh, look at that. When I first started being a game guru, it felt weird and I would get exhausted and I didn't want to do a full 6-8 hour shift. But the more you do it, the more comfortable you get with it. You start understanding, getting into the vibes, making these systems, making the steps that I use to teach board games with. And it just gets easier. You can manage your own energy levels better, I would say, and you can get people involved a little easier.
Yeah, and I try generally not to teach people how to play complicated games when I'm already having a bad day, because that's just a recipe for a more bad day. So if I'm having people over for board games and it turns out I had kind of a crappy morning or I had a stressful day at work, I'll say, hey, why don't we just play Jackbox? You're already here at my house and I don't have to teach you how to play that, and it's going to be fun anyways. And then save the energy-intensive explanations for a day where I have energy to spare to do that teaching. Mm-hmm. Everybody has a better time. I don't wind up getting grumpy and yelling at people, which I don't particularly like doing, so it's better for everybody.
If you know you're going to be teaching people board games, get a good night's sleep the night before and eat a nice healthy meal.
And caffeine. It helps.
It's like taking tests in middle school when they give you a little juice box and a donut. Maybe that was just my middle school.
Yeah, that's just you, bud.
I know.
Did you go to a luxury middle school?
I didn't think so, I guess.
Apparently you did.
I got trauma.
Oh. Right? Oh.
You there? And, oh.
No. Go.
You there, miss.
Yes.
So, how do you deal with when you have a mixed group of people? And you have someone who's a power player who doesn't, and then that's not a time on your turn, for example, because they just want to make the best possible move, and all the new people are all right, and then they start looking at the phone, and you feel that the person will feel like the rule book says X, Y, Z. How do you deal with that?
So how do you deal with a minutia person who wants all of the minutia to be correct and kind of min-max their gaming experience? One, if you have the foresight, it's kind of good if you know enough people who play board games to invite all of those people over at the same time and all of the other people at a different time. That sounds kind of cruddy, but there are games that it's easier to play with people who are like that. So hyper-competitive games, certain people like to play Dungeons & Dragons with that group of people, so I'd want the whole group to be like that. But if you have those people peppered in and you wind up having to deal with them, which sounds mean, but you are dealing with them, that point about making it clear that you're the person who's explaining the game kind of avoids those, but what about this, but what about that? You just say, I don't care, frankly, about that. So if you have comments about that, when you teach a game, you can teach it that way. And on people's turns, if you have someone who you are aware knows how to play the game and is taking a long time, that's a person that I personally would be a little more rude about when they're taking a long time, to just say, okay, what are you doing with your turn? Because it's clear that they're not confused. They're just trying to win optimally against people who are not qualified to win optimally, and it's not very fun. So telling that person, okay, you need to take your action and just move on.
Maybe those are the people that I play cooperative games with instead, We can all win as a team together.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to go back to the slide on knowing your audience, in that not only are you trying to figure out, what kind of games the whole of your audience wants to play, but you have to figure out how the audience might interact with each other. If one person is that power player, and you have three grandmothers at the table and one power player, That may not be quite the optimal play group.
David, you're just stuck on
my
grandma.
grandmothers.
That's the only term I thought of. I'm sorry, Anthony.
He's got grandmas on the brain. Okay.
And sometimes I will say, if you are that person and you are teaching the game, there are some games where there are ways that, like I was talking about with Galaxy Trucker, you can handicap yourself. I think either preventing yourself, like not allowing yourself to take a long time to make decisions and just saying in your own head, I'm going to take the first decision that comes to me and I'm not going to linger on it, so that other people can be taking the play time to make those decisions themselves can be helpful. There are games that I will deal myself extra cards for if I'm playing with people that I know are going to do worse at it than I am, so that when I am in those positions where I'm trying to make decisions or trying to do the best I can, I might take a little bit longer than the average person, but I'm not going to win uproariously by doing that, and I'm going to try to be as quick about it as I can because I'm managing my own behavior.
So a question about demo turns. I played a couple of like hidden information games where kind of it sort of feels like you want a more constructed demo turn to like show how information flows out, but I found like the players that I'm teaching it to kind of get confused when you go to reset from that. I was wondering if you had any advice for that sort of thing.
So my piece of advice for that sort of thing, the question was if you're doing how do you deal with demo turns if you're doing a hidden identity game and you want to have sort of a systematic demo turn to show a bunch of different cases. And so how I would deal with that is I would make it very different from how the game would start, like how the game is actually played, and I would be really explicit about it. So maybe that is a demo turn where we all play with no hidden information. So like open-handed, we'll all talk about what we're doing. Okay, now you understand, and now we'll start the game. You know, just make it like very explicit that this is, we're not playing, we're learning.
I sometimes also will, instead of doing a demo turn where I hand people cards and say, this is your card, I will do a phantom turn where I set up on the table, okay, so person A has this card, person B has this card, and play as if it was in somebody's hands, but I've revealed everything and I'm narrating for everybody. Because you're correct, it can be challenging to get people to then step away from that actual demo turn where they're playing and they've gained some information. So if you just demonstrate what all of them would be doing in that turn, then that can be a little helpful because then they aren't playing, they're watching somebody play.
How do you explain cooperative games versus competitive games? Like when you're playing against the board versus playing against each other? Is there different words that you use?
So how do you explain co-op versus competitive games? One, I think it's important when you're playing a co-op game to say we at just about every instance, because a lot of people, when I'm teaching a co-op game, I mentioned quarterbacking earlier, where like it feels like I am playing the game and I'm using all of your hands to play it. If I say we are trying to stop these diseases, what we are going to do on our turns is that we are going to be taking these actions to eliminate diseases and cure diseases, and we're each going to have special powers that make us more valuable to the team. Emphasizing all of that team we kind of mindset can help. And then I think if you're teaching a competitive game specifically, I think it can be really helpful to pepper in some strategy notes for people that aren't explicit in the rules, but you can say, hey, I'm a person who's played this game before, and I know that this particular track of upgrades is not as valuable, so unless you find it particularly interesting, you can focus on something else. Or it's important to keep in mind that by the end of the game, you need 7 points in order to progress. So you need to get 7 points, however you want to do that, but I'm just going to remind you from the beginning that you need to do that.
Yes.
So piggybacking off of that last thing, you know, in the co-op games, you have the turn hogs. So while you're still trying to cooperatively eradicate the thing, how do you deal with people who don't let the individual players make their own decisions? You know, you're going to do this, 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 and this, and then I'm going to do, no, I want to still, you know, how do we deal with that?
I think there is a subtle...
the question?
The question is how to deal with somebody else who is trying to hog everybody's turn in a cooperative game and tell everybody what to do so that you can win the best.
When one of your players is trying to quarterback for everybody else. I think there is a reasonable and subtle way to just kind of...
Not subtle, but
Not
effective.
subtle, but effective. There's a subtle way to say, hey, we let people play on their own turns. If they want to make that decision, they make that decision. It may not be optimal, and it's also kind of about tone in a sense, of just trying to get across the point of like, win or lose, we still got to let everybody do their own thing, because otherwise people are not having fun, and that's kind of the optimum factor here.
There's also a certain power in someone making those kind of comments. They're saying, all right, you're going to do this, this, and this, and I'm going to do this, this, and this. And you look at them, and you say, okay, Lauren, what do you want to do on your turn? That pointed silence and then turn away is a pretty effective like social cue for a lot of people to say, I'm not going to tell you to not talk, but I'm going to make it very clear that in this instance, your contributions are not as valuable as Lauren's because it's Lauren's turn, and you can think whatever you want about Lauren's turn, but it's up to them what they want to do on their turn.
I agree.
You there?
If you find yourself teaching board games a lot to a different audience, like what 3 board games would you guys say?
So the question
board
was, if you find yourself teaching board games a lot to different audiences, what are like a good general 3 to keep in your toolkit? Does that make sense?
Okay, so I would try and balance a lot of different things. Okay, oh my God, only 3 board games. Sorry. You saw my house. Okay. Okay, so I would try and balance different types of board games, different player counts. So personally, I'd probably go with a party game, a cooperative game, and a competitive game, just because I personally like party and cooperative games a lot. I think they bring very good vibes. And so I would choose the games based on that, and if you're going to make me choose actual games, I'm going to let someone else go first while I think about it.
I was going to say we should each pick our own 3.
Yes.
Yeah.
Agreed. So for me, I have a very similar mindset in that I want to have a quiver of 3 games that are very different from each other. So my 3 generally would be Mysterium, which is a cooperative asymmetric game. It looks like a pretty technical board game, but each turn is actually pretty straightforward. There's lots of pictures. It's mostly about interpretation and very little about board game mechanics. And that is a great one to break out. I broke it out with family that don't play board games very often. I really like hidden identity and deception games, so I keep things like Secret Hitler or Resistance in mind a lot because those are also relatively easy to teach. They're hyper-competitive, and I personally am a hyper-competitive person, and I know lots of those people, so it's nice to have that available. And then I like pattern recognition games like Jungle Speed or Set. They're really quick, they're easy to set down on the table. If people don't like them, it's really easy to just say, all right, well, the first round is going to take 10 minutes, and if you don't like it after that, we don't have to play anymore. Having a game like that available can be helpful because then you can just say, I wouldn't explain it that way at the beginning. I would not say, if you don't like this, there's an exit strategy. But you can vibe it in and say, all right, we've played our first round. Do you want to keep playing this? Because we could play this for 2 hours, or we could move on to something else.
Also to save all you guys, do not play Jungle Speed with Arden. Arden is not allowed to play Jungle Speed.
I'm really good at it, and nobody wants to play with me, and that means nobody else is good at it because nobody will play with me, so it's just me on my jungle throne. Alone.
All right. Okay.
I want to play that game.
It's very fun. I'll break your fingers.
I'm leaving.
I'm just going to lay it down. Skull, Codenames, and Mysterium. It's very solid. Skull is a very good. I like it as one of the easiest board games to teach new people, especially people who have played something like poker in the past.
You play with coasters.
Yeah,
you could play it at a bar.
I think it was originally
people
started.
will try to use it as a coaster, and then you will need to buy a new copy of the game.
No, I think it was originally a bar game written
that they made a real
just
board game
like,
for.
Yeah, scribbling on coasters.
Yes.
Oh.
The more
you learn.
know.
I like Skull because it's incredibly easy to pick up. It takes like 10 minutes to teach it to people, and it's very like cutthroat. It'll get people engaged really quickly.
But it's also short.
It's also very short. You can play around in what, like 20 minutes?
Yeah.
Codenames is very good because me and her both have linguistics degrees, and Codenames is a game of word association. So it's my jam. It's also a very good way to, like, you pick teams and then you are given a set of words. I can't describe games. This isn't my part of the panel. Arden, give me your over-under on Codenames.
You're trying to use a single word to get people to guess multiple words. So if there's 2 colors on the board, like red and blue, I might say color, and then they're supposed to guess red and blue.
Mm-hmm.
But you can also accidentally guess words that belong to your opponent and get them points, et cetera, et cetera. It's very good, and somebody better than me can teach it in 10 minutes. But it's great for just association in general and getting to know the people you're playing with, because there's this weird element of, I know that this person this person will get this mutual shared reference we have between us, and therefore I can say this word, and they will know that the words were chair, tree, and apple, 3 unconnected concepts that somebody.
I would argue that trees and apples are explicitly connected. By stems.
By stems. Well, other than that, yes. Okay, I picked mine. It's taken me a moment, but I have picked mine. So the first one would be, what is it? World Championship Russian Roulette.
Oh, it's so good.
Very, very fun. That is another, betting-y game. It's competitive, it's party, it's very easy to pick up. It's similar to, what's that game you played?
Dead Last.
It's like in the same vein as Dead Last. Not the same play style, but like a similar vibe. Or Bang.
Yeah.
Similar vibe to Bang. So that would be like my quick to teach, fun, goofy party game. I actually haven't played this game, but I'm going to count it anyway because I did set it up and I do own it.
Is it Wingspan?
It is not Wingspan. Obscurio, like very similar to Mysterium. I
But
think
it's
by the same
competitive.
people. But it is competitive. I'm not doing any cooperative games then. Well, that's fine. But it's competitive. It's semi-cooperative. There it is.
Is it Trader?
That's it. Yeah, there's a Trader. Okay, it's semi-cooperative, and so you get the like bonding experience. But there's something exciting.
And you get to bond over hating one person when you
Which
find
I
out that they are the
love.
traitor.
I love to do it. And then the like hardest competitive game I would probably choose would be Innis. It's very cool. That is my jungle speed.
She's really good at it for no reason.
It's like just a very fun territory control-ish.
Innis.
INIS.
It is a board game for board game people. It's not like Terra Mystica level complicated, but I wouldn't sit down at a table with Innis with like my mom, who
Or
doesn't play.
David's grandma,
Or
apparently.
David's 3 grandmothers. Any other questions? We do have a couple of minutes left, so.
I love trying new board games, and here we are at MAGFest, and they have like a whole library of games over there that I always want to try. And usually the spinning falls on me because I'm really good at memorizing rules really rapidly. But like, do you have any tips for like I wasn't even able to look back times that all people want to play this new game? Do you have any tips for like teaching a board game when you yourself are not good?
Okay. Do I have any tips for teaching a board game when you've just got it, you're at like MAGFest, and you don't have time to read the rule book twice, let alone 5 times?
Yeah.
Yeah. So my recommendation is, just be on the same page, Let the people that you're playing with know you're learning it with them, you need them to be on your side, and because you're the one reading the rules, you're going to teach this game, and we're going to play the game that you teach, Like, it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to play the game 100%.
You might play an entirely different game with the same pieces.
You could create your own game, is what I'm saying. No, but so I have found when not board game people teach board games, or even when board game people teach very in-depth board games, the first time you play, you're not really playing. Sometimes the first time you play is just like a warm-up, or to see how it goes, or to figure it out. Because looking back, you'll always make new decisions anyway. So just being on the same plane and being understanding and making sure that everyone at the table is going to be understanding as well, that would be my recommendation.
Also, if it's the kind of thing where you're like, oh, I'm going to buy this game and we're going to play it later tonight, you may be able to take a few minutes during some downtime to watch the YouTube tutorial on it and see if you can't get a little bit ahead of it.
Sometimes I will set my players up with a trap game, where I will sit at a table with them while they play a game like Skull that is very fast, that everybody already knows how to play, and then I will, in my hidey hole, teach myself how to play a board game real quick, and then I will emerge with the knowledge and the power. So having those like bait games or things like Fake Artist Goes to New York that you could honestly hide in the box of another game. You could just bring a bonus game inside your game because it's this big. And then you can just say, here is an appetizer, and then we will play this real game shortly.
Surprise game. You there in the back.
How do you go about making recommendations for the board game averse but mandatory inclusion?
So
mandatory.
how do you get your lame brother to play board games with you if he doesn't like board games? How do you recommend board games to people?
Or your competition averse mother.
Yes.
Or David's grandmother.
Or David's grandmother. So I think the game that you select is really important in that case because I have a competition-averse mother. Hi, Russell. It's Russell. I have a competition-averse mother who has 2 children who are incredibly good at competitive board games. And so my brother and I will make sure that we pick games that she's going to have a good time playing because I want to play board games with my mom. It's a thing that I enjoy. She likes hanging out with me. If we agree that we want to do that, it's on me as the person who picks the game to set her up to have a good time. Because as a person in general in my life, I really hate inviting people to do something that they don't enjoy. I want to make sure that when I ask my friends to do something with me or my family that they're going to have fun just like I am. So I won't set my mom up with something like Bonanza because she's not good at the strategy of picking the games and doing the negotiation. It's a bean game. I don't know. It's a game about beans. It's a game about beans. It should be pretty straightforward, but she's 55. So it's not particularly old, but she doesn't like board games that much. But she likes trick-taking games, and she likes things like Rummy. So I might pick games that are like the games that I already know that she enjoys. I also would not use board game terms when I talk to her about board games ever. So I would say, do you want to play a fun game where we collect sushi? And then it turns out we're playing a drafting game, secretly.
Oh, you got something, Dave?
I was just going to say, I think we have time for one more question after this. Continue, Jess.
We got a fist.
We got a fist.
Okay, so very quickly, just to wrap us up. Again, at the Board Game Cafe, a lot of the people that come in to play games are board gamers, you know? They're just people that are like, oh, this is really cool, this is really interesting. And so I like to like slowly trap them into board games and like go down a path, you know? As Arden mentioned earlier with kids, it's very similar. You know, we'll start with something super easy. We'll start with something kind of intro, and then maybe I'll drop in something that has like maybe a little bit of drafting in it, you know? And then if they enjoyed that, we can kind of go farther down until they're suddenly playing a Euro game and they didn't realize
You put
it.
a path in the woods, and then there's a gingerbread house at the end of it, and then inside the gingerbread house is Terra Mystica. Secretly.
I have been Trail of Crumbsed into playing Scythe more times than I can count.
It just happens sometimes. You just wind up sitting down, and it's 2 hours later, and you've already played Scythe. All right. Thank you all for coming. As we said, we'd be happy to send out slides if you want to come up here and write down your email. And we will see all of you tomorrow if you choose to come back. You don't have to, though.
Same place, same time.
Yeah.